It is a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing an endodontist, Dr. Joel Small, DDS, MBA, FICD, on coaching the dental mind. Let me read his bio. Dr. Joel Small is a clinical endodontist, coach, entrepreneur, speaker, and the author of Face to Face, a leadership guide for healthcare professionals and entrepreneurs. In his coaching practice, Dr. Small works with a limited number of motivated healthcare professionals specializing in work with endodontists. His clients are looking to experience personal and professional growth while taking their business practices to a higher level. Together, they work to reduce their stress and time at work while seeing more profits. He received his Doctor of Dental Surgery degree and completed his residency in endodontics at the University of Texas School of Dentistry in Houston, Texas. He received his MBA with an emphasis in healthcare management from Texas Tech University. He is a graduate of the University of Texas in Dallas Jindal School of Management postgraduate program in executive coaching. Dr. Small is a co-owner of Phase 2 Associates, a dental consultancy and brokerage firm located in Dallas, Texas, that brokers restorative practices in Texas and specialty practices nationwide. Throughout his career, he's remained committed to his profession. He has served the American Association of Endodontists as a member of numerous committees, including his service as a trustee of the Research and Educational Foundation. He has also served the AAE as one of their national spokespersons. He is a past president of the Southwest Society of Endodontists. He is a nationally recognized speaker on the subjects of leadership and professional development. And here it is, a Sunday at 11 a.m., and you decided to spend an hour with me. Joel, I am so thankful for that. Thank you so much for being on my show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much.
So the first question I have to ask every endodontist is, are you an apical barbarian who loves to get his file all the way to the end of the tooth with a puff of sealer out the end, or are you a pulp lover and always love to stop a ½ millimeter short of the apex?
Well, we're a ½ millimeter short of the apex if we can do that. We'd be very happy with that on every case.
So you're a pulp lover, and I got to ask you one other question. This is a deeply philosophical question that you could answer. You know, in our lifetimes, the big taboo in endodontics was Sargenti, and one of my buddies from Kansas had a lawsuit over one, and I mean it was $1 million lawsuit. I mean it just wreaked havoc on everybody. But in general, of Angelo Sargenti, who was an Italian dentist, right? Was he an endodontist?
I don't think he was an endodontist, no.
But he was an Italian dentist. But I got to ask you, this is a tough question to ask you. His existence, his life, his Sargenti technique, overall, do you think he was, at that time in the world, thinking of all the millions of teeth that it did save, do you think overall his existence was positive, or do you think, you know, they say 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Do you think that was 2 steps forward in dentistry overall for the planet, or do you think that was 1 step back?
Well, first of all, Howard, you must be asking me this question because you know that I'm old enough to remember.
And he's passed away now, so we're talking about a man who passed away.
We're talking some years back, but and I have to tell you this, by the way. I was honored to attend the actual debate between Herb Schilder and Angelo Sargenti at an AAE meeting back. I can't even remember how many years ago that's been.
You got to guess. You got to roughly guess.
Oh my gosh. Let me think. It would have to have been probably in the late 80s or early 90s, I would think. I'm guessing.
Did anybody tape that? Is it on YouTube or anything?
Well, I bet you it is, actually. Boy, I'll be happy to look for you and see.
Yeah, it was Angelo Sargenti.
Right.
What was Herb Schilder?
Yep.
And was that SCH?
SCHILDER.
Ryan, you're my go-to YouTube man. Start seeing if you can find a YouTube video of Herb Schilder versus Angelo Sargenti. But how did that? I mean, obviously we know that Sargenti went to the wayside, and Herb Schilder and all of his techniques went forward. But again, for the whole planet at that point in time in the history of humanity, do you think Angelo Sargenti was 2 steps forward or 1 step back for the?
Well, let me clarify this, because I think at that time endodontics was pretty stagnant. When I graduated from my residency in 1978, all the way up until about 1990, we went through a fairly stagnant phase of endodontics where nothing really changed. Then in 1990, some of the visionary people in endodontics came around, people like Cliff Ruddle and Steve Buchanan and Gary Carr and some of the visionaries, and they totally changed the face of endodontics. But prior to that, it was a pretty stagnant profession for a period of time. And so I think Sargenti came in realizing that the success rate in endodontics was, probably less than what was being reported back then, and came up with his technique. And did I ever use it? No, of course not. But like you said, at the time, it was something that really fit for the time in endodontics. Now, I don't think you could not defend that particular technique today, because there's just so much stuff that's better out there, and so much of technology has increased and improved so much. So it'd be hard to defend that today. At the time, there were a lot of issues that came up. Some of the research that was being quoted was being denied by the American Association of Endodontists. So it was a pretty acrimonious relationship between the Sargenti people and the AAE. And of course, I'm probably tainted a little bit being an endodontist. It was not a technique that I would have chosen to use at that time. I'll put it that way.
But how many teeth around the planet do you think it did save?
Ooh, boy, that's a good question. That's a good question.
What would you guess? Because there's 7 billion people, and they each have 32 teeth.
Well, let's see. What's the AAE figure showing? Like I think it's 12 million, maybe 12 million root canals done a year, something like that. I mean, it's an astronomical number. So the people that are Sargenti had a pretty good following, actually. So I would think there's quite a few million teeth treated with Sargenti technique. So yes, I think that in certain circumstances it did have some value. Absolutely.
But I just want to say to any of the fans listening out there, that is indefensible in the court of law. When you get sued with a failed Sargenti root canal, they are going to judge you by the endodontist in your city, and those guys are all going to give a double thumbs down, and you're going to lose. End of story.
Howard, I'm not even sure that, and you may know better than I did, I'm not even sure that Sargenti technique's even being used today anymore. Do you know for a fact that it is?
Well, it's a big world out there. There's 220 countries.
Sure.
It's faded away. I mean, it's gone in the United States. I mean, if you ever find it in the United States, it's always a real small rural town with a really old dentist, and
Right.
And that's old to me, and I'm 53. But yeah, in other areas of the planet, where it's hope I don't offend any Russians, but where I see it used the most is actually old Soviet countries.
Right.
In fact, and a lot of them don't even use it with paraformaldehyde. You know what they use it with?
No.
You can't make this up. Instead of IRM paste with paraformaldehyde, they use it with IRM and just a sprinkle of arsenic, black arsenic powder.
Yeah. Right.
And it turns the tooth just solid black. And if you ever talk to some Americans, there's a lot of Russians in New York and parts of California, and those dentists out there will tell you that sometimes old Russian guys will come in with a tooth with a root canal, never had a crown, and it's just jet black as coal because the arsenic stained the tooth.
Yeah.
But
I have seen those, and the other thing is if there's any vital tissue left apical to that, you'll never get into it because it calcifies like a brick. I mean, once you put it in there on top of it, there's vital tissue apical to that, you'll never get back down that canal because it calcifies over time.
So what percent of your practice, right? Tell us what you're doing mostly. Is it mostly with endodontist?
What my coaching, you mean?
Yes.
Actually, I have a good endodontic following, but I do work with restorative dentists as well. I mean, being a dentist and being a coach, I can coach anybody. Actually, I could coach people in in the business community. We're trained to coach executives and businesses and so forth. But because of my background, I chose to limit my practice to dentistry, because it's what I know best.
And so what do you do as a coach? And by the way, your website is Lead Face to Face, www.leadfacetoface.com, and you also have another website, www.phase2associates.com. So,
I have a third one now. I have a third one this evening. It has all of that on it, and it's joelsmall.com.
JOEL small SASMALL.com.
Right.
So talk about those three websites. What are you doing? What is coaching? What is Phase 2 Associates? What is joelsmall.com? What are you up to these days? Just take it from there and just rant.
Well, I think insanity runs in my family. I stay pretty busy. Uh, Phase Two Associates is actually a brokerage consultancy where we broker dental practices. We started out initially brokering primarily or strictly specialty practices nationwide. We did endo, perio, and oral surgery. Within the last 3 years, we opened up a brokerage firm in Texas for restorative practices as well. So we've been doing that for about 8 years now. My coaching practice is about a year and a half old. I graduated from the program back in August of last year, so it's about a year old. And I work with dentists. I help them develop the culture in their practices. I help them develop their leadership skills. I help them overcome blind spots and self-limiting beliefs that keep them from achieving their goals. Basically, coaching it's the number two fastest growing profession according to Forbes magazine, and it's the method of choice from among the Forbes 100 companies for training their leadership teams. And it's become very popular. It just doesn't have the recognition in dentistry that it may have in the general business community.
And what was the fastest growing? If coaching is the second fastest, do you remember what the first and the third was?
Well, no, I don't, to be honest with you, but I do know that was number two.
So your coaching website is Lead Face to Face?
Well, actually, it's joelsmall.com.
So then what's Lead Face to Face?
Lead Face to Face is actually my blog now, and then I had, these were some old websites. One was Read Face to Face that would put you to my book and you could order it online. So, but everything is covered now in joelsmall.com.
And what's the name of your book? The Face to Face, a leadership guide for healthcare professionals and entrepreneurs?
That's it.
And it's available on Amazon?
It's available on Amazon or through my website.
Let me give you you didn't ask for it. Let me give you a tip on your book.
Yes, sir.
I was listening to the founder of Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos, and he was jokingly saying how he spent $1 billion in a decade building this technology, and instead of having all these books on inventory, just have single book to print. So he's trying to get everybody to submit their book in one form. So you order Joe Small's book, it just prints the book. That way we don't have to guess, do we print 10, 100, 1,000? And by the time that got done, it wasn't even necessary because he said the whole market had moved to audiobooks. And what I did with my book is I sat down and read it, and it took 5.5 hours, and the audiobook outsells paperback. So have you made an audiobook of your book?
I don't. I don't. I have it on Kindle, but I don't have an audiobook yet.
Yeah, so you just need to find 5.5 hours and just sit down and read that book, because they like to read it while they're driving on their stationary bike, on the treadmill, whereas you and I are old school. We sit down in a chair and under a lamp and read. And these Generation Xers and Millennials, they want to listen to a book while they clean the kitchen, do laundry, mow the yard. It's all about multitasking. You'll actually, whatever your sales are, you will absolutely double them and more the minute you come out with an audiobook.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think my Texas accent would be a positive or a negative?
Well, I believe that if you're a consultant, you should read it yourself, because they should get to know you and your personality and your flavor, and see if they have the chemistry to relate to you to call you up and take your advice. I would much rather hear it from the person. Just like in my lifetime, I've read 1,000 nonfiction books, and I always loved the biographies more than the autobiographies. I don't think the person sitting in the library studying someone is. I'll give you a classic example. Read Arm & Hammer's autobiography, and then read Arm & Hammer's biography, and it's like you'd be talking about two different people. So then it comes down to two different perspectives. So what is coaching?
Well, coaching is a pretty unique profession. It's differentiated from therapy, for example, because we don't deal in the past. We don't deal in historical things. We don't try and bring somebody from dysfunction to normal. We assume that the people we're working with are resourceful, creative, and so forth, and are actually performing at a normal level. What we do is we help enhance their abilities to achieve their goal. And we do that through a method of discovery and talking with people, asking powerful questions. They're giving them thoughts or things to think about, We talk about building culture with them. We talk about developing their leadership skills. We talk about interpersonal relationships in their office. In my field, particularly, if I'm dealing with a young dentist, for example, particularly an endodontist, I do a little bit of consulting as well. I call it consultative coaching, where we do a little bit of consulting. But the difference is that we bring out things that are already there within these people. They already have the skills and all the talents that they need. We just enhance them and bring them out in them.
And how successful has this been for you? I mean, are you helping them?
Absolutely.
And how do you measure that? Does it help them by lowering their stress, increasing their net income? How's it helping them?
I think all the above. I mean, certainly there are probably 3 or 4 major issues that dentists come to a coach about. One would be work-life balance would be one of them. Interpersonal relationships, i.e. staff issues, time management. In today's world, we can be overwhelmed with a lot of the stuff that we have to do. We talk about essentialism. There's actually a great book, if you haven't read it, it's by McCowan. It's called Essentialism, and it talks about how we decide what's essential in our lives, where to put our energy. We talk about that. We talk about creating action plans. We have actionable plans to achieve goals. We go through all of that. It's a pretty intensive. It's fun though. I mean, it's not like going through psychotherapy where it's a negative. We are not. I'm not in the business to correct problems. I'm in there to enhance capabilities.
And what do you think are the common problems? They always say, you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. And podcasts are a big hit with millennials. And so you're talking to a lot of kids, right? You're talking to thousands of kid dentists under 30, and they know what they know, and they think all the answers to the universe are going to get an A in calculus and physics and endo and learn how to place a root canal. Try to paint a picture to these kids listening to you of what they don't know.
Well, I think it's what we don't know as a profession. It's not just the kids. I mean, one of my famous quotes is from a guy by the name of John Gardner, and basically it says, "We can't solve our problems because we don't recognize them." And I think that's so true in dentistry. When I went back to school and did my MBA, I became really interested in leadership, and I came to recognize the fact that the dental profession are the absolute best profession in the world for micromanagement. And why is that? It's because we are trained to manage systems, and that's how we lead our practices. And we think we're leading our practice when in actuality we're not. We're managing systems. We set up systems for accounts receivable. We track referrals. We track no-shows. We track everything, and we set up systems and we manage them. But over and above that, there's the potential for leadership, which is transformational. But unless we recognize that and we develop our leadership skills, we're going to be that person that tends to burn out in dentistry. Because if you ever read the book by Gerber called The E-Myth.
Yes.
You ever read The E-Myth?
It was one of the most amazing books I ever read back in the day, probably 30 years ago.
Absolutely. You remember I have the visual, the guy juggling the balls. Okay, this is in his book. There's a guy juggling the balls, and he gets so many balls in the air that ultimately one of them falls. And what happens to the rest of them? They all just hit the ground. So it's the same thing in dentistry. We are so into micromanagement, so into juggling these balls, that ultimately we can't keep up with it. As our practices grow, we become busier and busier. We have less capability to keep up and manage these, or micromanage, not even just manage, but to micromanage all these systems that we've been taught to manage. Rather than develop our people and have them doing that for us, we keep on trying to do it ourselves, and ultimately we are overcome by it.
So you opened up a can of worms. You said E-Myth. A lot of kids out there might not have heard of it. Summarize what was the E-Myth, and why was that a legendary book that sold over 10 million copies and continues to still sell copies today?
What was it?
Yeah.
To me, it was a life-changing book to read. I mean, of course, he goes into it as far as.
But explain it to the kids listening what that book was about.
Well, the book itself was about systemizing things. He talks about Kroc and how he built McDonald's, and a system that works irrespective of whether Croc's there or not, Croc being the founder of McDonald's. And so he talks about, creating the systems, but yet not having to work them like we do in dentistry, but to have the entrepreneurial mindset. We're technicians. This is a term he uses in his book. Dentists come out of dental school as technicians. We're not entrepreneurs. And being technicians, we're looking for a place to do what we do. We're not looking for a place to lead so that we can do what we do. Okay, now, does that make sense? So we build a practice so that we can practice our trade, but we don't know how to lead that practice. One of the biggest ironies I find is that after all of our training, if you look at all the books that are written today and all the thought leaders in leadership, dentists in particular are probably the poorest trained to lead and to be successful in a business. They lack so many of the skills that are required to be successful in business. It's amazing that so many dental practices are successful today and so few of them actually fail. And the reason they don't fail is because we become the masters of managing systems. And we can eke along for however many years by managing these systems. But the problem is, by doing that, we prevent ourselves by becoming what we could be, because we're so stuck in that framework and in that frame of mind that we don't move beyond that to become leaders in our practice and develop the culture and the people within our practice so that we don't have to manage those systems. And then we have people underneath us that are resourceful and thoughtful and creative to do the kinds of things that we're doing right now ourselves.
So I want to ask you a question, since you and I have seen this corporate dog twice. So back in the day when you and I were young, we saw Orthodontic Centers of America make it all the way to the New York Stock Exchange and a dozen on NASDAQ. And they all fabulously imploded. Right. And then they're gone for a decade and now they're back. Right. Are they back for good, or do you predict they will fabulously implode again?
I think they're here for good. I do. I think they're here for in some shape, manner, and form. I don't know. They're going to morph. I mean, I think there's going to be I think over time they'll morph, but I think they're here for good. I really do. I think we'll see that for certainly the remainder of my career and yours, and possibly for the foreseeable future.
And what's different about them this time than, say, Orthodontic Centers of America that made it to the coveted New York Stock Exchange, was the only dental services management organization to pull off that trick? Whereas we saw the biggest leader today, Heartland, they couldn't do an IPO on NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. In fact, no one in Wall Street really would touch them. They had to go to Canada. So why do you think, based on, I mean, wouldn't you think if corporate dentistry today was fabulous and expanding with internally generated cash flow and building de novo offices out of cash flow, that they would have done an IPO on NASDAQ? I mean, isn't it kind of a litmus test to say, dude, if you couldn't go public, I mean, isn't that the litmus test of a business model? I mean, even LinkedIn went public.
Right. Well, I think the difference now really has nothing to do with the corporate dentistry. I think it's the mindset of the dentists now that are coming out of the programs and the debt service that they're having to carry, which I think is a huge factor. We see that a lot because I have the brokerage company as well. And, some of the specialists, for example, coming out of residency programs, $500,000 in debt. And the traditional model for them to come into a practice as an associate doesn't allow for a salary. And of course, we're pushing that with a lot of our sellers to bring somebody on with a salary base. Here's the difference, Howard. When you and I graduated from dental school, I went down to McAllen, Texas, which is 10 miles from the Mexican border, and set up an endodontic practice. Man, what a mistake that was. Okay, it was a economically deprived area. I was there for 3 years, and I felt like I was selling Hoover vacuum cleaners. Okay, because trying to sell a root canal to the patient was like trying to sell a Hoover vacuum cleaner. I picked up and left after 3 years, basically closed the practice because there were no other endodontists down there, and everybody else was smarter than I was and didn't want to go down there. And I walked away from it, came up to Plano, Texas, and I've been there since 1981. Today, kids, the young dentists today cannot come out of dental school and do that. They would be totally overrun by the debt service they have to carry. It's just not possible for them to stumble
And
anymore.
that's where Heartland was the most successful because I think Rick saw a crisis in liquidity. I mean, every dentist I know, was Bruce Beard, whoever, that was doing 2, 3, 4, 5 million a year, they had an illiquid asset. They were never going to sell. So when they realized that Heartland could come in and write you a check, it was. I think if you could say what was the number one most genius thing Rick Workman did was providing liquidity to all the practices. Like if you want to sell a house and it's 3 bedroom, 2 bath, you can sell it in a week in Phoenix. But if you want to sell some, 10,000 square foot monster house with a 5 car garage, you better wait till somebody gets drafted in the NBA or the NFL because you own that house. It has no liquidity. And what Rick has done so geniusly is provided liquidity to probably 1,000 offices around the country that couldn't sell. Would you agree with that?
Well, we're still seeing the practices sell, but yes, you're right. I mean, Heartland does offer it's a pretty quick turnaround for a dentist. They're offering a pretty good amount for the practices. We're still seeing practices sell in the metropolitan areas. You get rural now, and you're having some problems, but we do see the practices selling now. But I think from the viewpoint of the younger dentist, they offer them, an income to start out with. Now, are they going to stay with Are they going to stay with the corporate dentistry? Who knows? I mean, some of them will. A lot of them will go out and look for other opportunities, either as an associate somewhere or buying a practice. We're seeing a lot of that as well. But, I'm not as down on corporate dentistry as some people think. I think they provide a service for certain aspects of our profession. Take, for example, I was at an AAE course, and they had a female dentist there talking about her experience with corporate dentistry. Well, she has children at home. She doesn't want to own a practice. She wants to be able to get in and out of the practice, to have her schedule set so she can, be there for her children. And corporate dentistry allows that, where business ownership would not. So there are certain aspects of corporate dentistry that actually do meet certain people's needs and criteria. So I'm not as down on it as some. I do think that there has to be a change in how they're handling some of the dentists, and of course, historically, how they handled decisions regarding treatment planning and so forth. The dentist has to be in charge of that. I think there's no question about it.
Well, as far as saying if you're down on it, down or good, well, the market's who speaks. And I mean, look at the market. I mean, there are now 35 large corporate dental office
Sure.
chains doing 12 to 15% of the market, employing 8,000 dentists with over 6 billion annual revenue. In the U.S. market of dentistry is 129 billion a year, with 955,000 employees and 175,000 locations. So what Rick has done geniusly, he provided liquidity to the selling doctor, and he's providing jobs to graduates. And a lot of these dentists bitching about corporate dental offices, their office open 32 hours a week out of 168 hours a week, and you don't see them offering any jobs for associates. Then when they
Right.
all come out and go work for Heartland, they all bitch that Heartland's hiring all the dental graduates. Well, you didn't offer them a job.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, yeah.
Right.
So you said the difference between the back in the day, the first round, the Orthodontic Centers of America, and all the ones on NASDAQ now was the difference in mindset, also student loan debt. Do you think another variable of that was the fact that now in corporate we see 65% of the dentists being female? You graduated. How many women were in your class, and how many? And now it's half women. How many women were you graduating from dental school class back in
Less than
1978?
less than 10, probably five.
Five out of how many?
120.
5 out of 120.
Right.
And those were some brave women back in the day, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
The weirdest thing I never thought about. I went to Canada, built a $500 million human rights museum, and I walked out there. Where was it, Ryan? Was it Winnipeg or Cal? It was in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Unbelievable. But a lot of it you'd all seen. The American Indian, slavery, the Holocaust. But the thing that got me the most was in the sports section. When I was a kid, I didn't realize the Boston Marathon was for all men. And every year this woman would go out and run the race. And they showed pictures of like 6 big old fat cops trying to track her down. And it'd take several miles for them to tackle her and everything. And she'd get arrested and everything. And she'd be back the next year. And I thought, God, I mean, you just don't think of all the little forms of that. And I look back at the when I was a freshman, the few women in the senior class, and those are some brave souls. I mean, they were really going into an all male profession and it was really hard on them mentally, to crack that glass ceiling. Let's go to practice brokers. So you said practices are selling urban but not rural. So if you're a kid listening to this and you just walked out with $350,000 of debt and you're 25, 26 years old, what's reality if they wanted to go buy a practice? Or tell them, are they going to have to work a couple years? Are they going to have to pay down some debt? Is there a size of a practice that sells like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Are there other dental offices that are kind of illiquid? Who's selling? Who's buying?
Well, I'll tell you what the discussion with the young dentist goes like this. Number one, do you have previous experience? In other words, they're coming out, say, of a residency program. Have you practiced general dentistry before? How many years? Because what we don't want them to do is to say, buy $1 million practice, but not be able to produce $1 million worth of dentistry. Okay, and there's a certain aspect of temperament, hand speed, all those things that go into being a successful practitioner that when you come right out of school, you don't have. I mean, let's face it, you didn't have it, I didn't have it particularly. If you're going to go out and buy a big practice, you better be able to produce that kind of dentistry and do it well. Otherwise, it does two things. One, your chance of failure is greatly increased, and number two, the stress level is almost unbearable trying to produce that kind of dentistry. So we have that kind of discussion with young dentists. So we match people up as far as their needs and their opportunities. When we have a practice available, we know what our buyers are looking for, we know what their capabilities are, and we try and match those up. So that's the best thing we can do for a client. And as far as what's selling, certain areas are hot right now. Texas is very hot right now. I mean, not just weather-wise. I'm talking, dental practice-wise. It's a very business-friendly state. There's no state income tax. Certain people are leaving places like California or New York or whatever, coming down here. So we're getting hundreds and hundreds of calls all the time. Is there a practice available in Texas? It's just like it used to be in California. The rural practices, you have to be either. You may want to go there, but does your spouse want to go there? That's usually the issue. You can find a dentist that wants to go there, but does the spouse really want to go to a small town? So it's taking longer to sell those practices. I have to tell you, Howard, some of those practices are extremely profitable.
Oh my God, I've been saying that for 30 years. The guy, if you ever find a practice does $1 million, doesn't take any PPOs, and nets 400, they're in a town of 5,000.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is divorce your existing wife who wants to live in the big city and move to the rural. Can I quote you on that?
Okay, Howard, it could be divorce your existing husband now. Remember that. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I didn't even realize. Oh, my God, that was so bad. But yeah, I mean, the data I read, and it's hard to get clean data, but it looks like about 2/3 of the dentists are practicing in 117 major metros where half of the United States lives. And the other 1/3 of the dentists are practicing in 19,022 towns where the other half of America lives. So that alone tells you, rule number one in business demographics is go where they ain't. Right. And they're just not going where there ain't. I mean, I watch it when they come to Phoenix. They all go to North Scottsdale because they think that's where all the rich people live. Sure. And there's 14 million dentists on every corner, and the houses where the people live are consuming an acre. And then you go to the west side of Phoenix where it's poor, an acre of apartments might have 50 people living on it, and there's hardly any dentists over there. I mean, you just see that over and over and over. So and who goes to rural, who listens best to that? It's the Mormon dentist. They've already got the wife, the family's a deal. They don't care if they're in a town of 5,000. And as far as buying a practice too big from them, they don't care. They'll put their molar root canal before lunch. So if it takes 2 hours instead of 1, they'll lose their lunch, and they don't care about that. And then they'll put their big case at the end of the day. So if it takes till 7 o'clock at night, they don't care either. And then they'll play catch up on Saturday. I swear, if I had to bet, if I could build a corporate dental chain of just Mormon dentists who are going to have as many kids as I did, at least 4, oh my gosh, it'd be an indentured servant program. Those guys would just work around the clock. So that's another thing when you're looking for an associate amongst a field of millennials. Millennials get a rap for being kind of, less work ethic than their parents. But if that coyote is hungry, it's going to catch a rabbit. You get some kid that's $350,000 in debt with a stay-home wife and a bunch of kids. They'll do 7 to 7 Monday through Saturday without blinking for a decade.
Yeah, they've got an incredible work ethic. They do. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So are you seeing that work ethic in the millennials? I mean, you're a generation nexter, or you're a baby boomer.
Boomer. I'm a boomer.
You're a boomer. Do you think the millennials are working less in your mind?
That's a good question. I see some that are incredibly capable and have incredibly good work ethics, and I think that what we're seeing now it's not, and I don't think it's the millennials necessarily. I think what you said earlier really kind of encapsulates everything. We're seeing a lot of women in the workforce, and their needs are different, very different from what you and our needs were when we graduated. And I think we're seeing the whole market change to accommodate those needs. And I think the women have had a huge impact on what we're seeing in the dental market right now. As far as their work ethic, I've actually been very impressed. Now, I will tell you, when you go talk to one of the old codgers like myself, and you talk to them about their previous associates, their first comment is they don't want to work. Okay, I hear that so many times from dentists. I don't know about associates. I had one who didn't want to work. Well, being a coach, I say, well, what does that mean? And I have them explain that to me. Sometimes I think there's a little disconnect between our generation, the millennials, as far as communicating what our expectations are of these people. And so a lot of times that's where the breakdown occurs in the communication. But from my experience, I've run across some extremely capable and hardworking young dentists that, I'm encouraged by the generation. Actually, I'm not discouraged.
Yeah, I'm most encouraged when you take a dozen of them out on some missionary dental trip in like Mexico, or I've been with a group in Tanzania, and oh my God, their heart is in the right place, and
Absolutely.
that's the main thing. I mean, I watched that in um, Mexico, where I was dead dog tired, and so I call it a day. But you'd see the line standing out there, and they were going to stand in line all night long in the rain. And these dentists were all saying, "Well, I feel guilty sleeping. I mean, she's standing out there in the rain with a toothache. I'm just going to keep going." And I mean, it actually brought tears to my eyes. It was unbelievable.
You
So
know,
what if you're a dentist selling your practice? I mean, you sell general dentist, endo, perio, oral surgery, or do the is there any easy rule of thumbs of what a general dentist office is selling? Is it an EBITDA number, interest for earnings, taxes, depreciation, amortization, a multiple of earnings and net income, or is it really just a multiple of sales, regardless of what the overhead is? I mean, if you have a practice, what is the basic formulas for general dentists versus specialty practices like endo, perio, and oral surgery?
well, understand first of all that when you buy a practice, you're buying an income stream is what you're buying. Okay, so really with
But is
that,
the income stream just total revenue, or is it just net income earnings?
oh no, of course not, because somebody could have gross revenues of 1 million but have 800,000 in overhead. So that's not going to be nearly as valuable. Somebody's got 1 million in gross revenue and 500,000 in their overhead, so 50%. In general, restorative practices sell at a higher multiple than specialty practices because they have a recurring patient base. Endo, and if you were going to go rule of thumb, which I don't always recommend, endo is going to sell somewhere between the 60 to 75 range. Oral surgery probably 65 to 75. Perio probably in there, and then restorative will be a little bit higher because they have a patient base, which is
Like
you
how
know
much higher?
what, pardon me, yeah, they'll sell higher.
But what you said the other three were 60 to 60.
They're probably 75 to 80% in restorative practices.
So
Yeah.
let's go right to overhead, because you do see some $1 million practices where the dentist is taking home 150,
Right.
and you do see some that do 750 and the dentist taking home 200, and you see some that are 500,000 and the dentist taking home 200. What are your thoughts on overhead? And I want you to explain this also. I'm going to throw a two numbers at you. In 2005, dental income, according to the ADA, peaked at $219,000, and at 2015, it was down to 174. So that's a slide of $45,000 a year net income. When you and I got out of school, the method was cost plus profit equals price. We'd submit the price to the insurance, and they just pay a percent. And then the insurance companies turned that around and said, "No, I'm giving you the price. minus budget. I mean, price minus, then you subtract your profit. Now you arrive at a budget. And I think that is the number one reason why overhead is going up, is because PPOs, back when I got out of school, only 5% of the dentists didn't take indemnity. And now only 6% of the dentists only take indemnity. 82% of the dentists take a PPO, and then there's discount plans. There's all this. So talk to me about overhead.
Well, I think in today's market, what we're seeing in general now, and this doesn't apply to every practice, but we're seeing that there's been pretty much a plateau of income. We're not seeing practices go up like they used to in years past. So the past 5, 6, 7 years, it's been fairly flat. But yet the overhead, the cost of doing business continues to rise. So what we tell our clients is, you have to it's amazing how many people have no idea what their overhead is or how much they're paying for a certain item or whatever. We stress the fact that you have to maintain your overhead at a certain level in order to be profitable. So the way we're seeing people profitable today is they're lowering overhead. That's basically how it's happening, because the revenues have flattened out, at least for the time being anyway.
So go over overhead. What for a general dentist, since that's the majority of our listeners, what should overhead be, and then break it down.
Well, it can vary significantly, but for most general dentists, your overhead's probably in the 50 to 60% range. Supplies will vary. When you say break it down, if you're placing implants, your supplies are going to be significantly higher. Let's say, your supply bill would be, say, 10%. The lab bill, probably, 3-4%. Salaries in the 25 to 30% range. Facility, probably 6% would be what you'd want to maintain.
Facility, you mean rent or mortgage?
Yes. Yeah. And then, of course, a lot of that, if you're on a lot of plans, then that's certainly you're taking you're writing off a lot of the income right there too. So it's stressing. It's stressing these practices. There's no question about it.
Well, I call this show Dentistry Uncensored because we just talk straight. And a big question these guys are having is, okay, I come out of school $350,000 in debt, and everybody's telling me I need a CBCT, that's $100,000. They're telling me I need a laser, that's another $85,000. They're telling me I need a CAD cam, that's another $150,000. What do you say about those three high cost technology?
Well, unless you're paying for them, in other words, if you're going to buy a CBCT, you better be paying for it. You better have the patient flow that's significant enough that it's going to be paying for itself. And it can become a profit center. If they're not profit centers, I would say don't purchase them right out of school. I think that'd be a big mistake. And I'd say start out as minimal as you can. If you have an office that's got a room for 4 ops, maybe finish out 2, and don't go for the whole fancy office right at the beginning. I think we see people getting in trouble, and what happens a lot of times. And this is a very unfortunate situation, Howard. I get calls all the time by people that are maybe 3-4 years in practice and they're not doing well. They want to sell the practice. Well, they don't understand that practice is going to sell for a fraction of a 3-year weighted average of their revenue, let's say 0.7 or 70% or something like that. When I explain to them that they're going to be upside down selling the practice, and they're going to go to closing the check in hand, they get very upset. They tend to think that their practice is worth more than it is. So it can be a very difficult scenario for them. So the best thing to do is start out minimal and add on as you grow.
So let me ask you this. What do the successful offices with less stress and high net income, what are they doing more of than the offices that are upside down and stressed and can't even sell their practice? What are the common themes that you see?
Well, I think there's one huge common theme, Howard, and
I know what it's going to be. They're bald. They're short, fat, and bald.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Let me say this. I think the difference between a wildly successful practice and a mediocre practice is right here.
Absolutely. Between the ears.
It's right here, and I guarantee you that dentists that lead exceptional practices think in extraordinary ways. And I can tell you from my experience, because I can go to a town and I can have, say, for example, an endodontic practice, and they may be floundering, and they have every excuse in the world why that might be. It's the economy, it's a competition, they can't keep staff. I can go down the street and there's another endodontic practice that is absolutely wildly successful. And the only difference is in the head of the owner and the way they think about what they do.
They say you're never supposed to talk about sex, religion, or politics or violence. So let's start with politics. Don't you isn't that kind of weird about the country too? It's about what's your head, because I want to ask you this. You're in Texas and it's booming.
Right.
But I see this crazy election with all these people saying things, but I look at the numbers. We have less than 5% unemployment. We're adding 200,000 jobs a year. Our debt is only 1 year's GDP. I mean, you look at that compared to all the other countries on earth, and this is number one. We have the reserve currency, so all the millionaires around the world want to have all their money in U.S. dollars and U.S. banks. Why do you think Texas is booming? Do you think it's because they have a different mindset? I mean, when I go to Texas, it's got more immigrants than dang near anywhere. Are they screaming in Texas to build a wall along Mexico? Or do they realize that's part of their boom?
Well, I think most Texans are concerned about immigration, yes. I don't know about building a wall, but I do think we have to do something about the immigration right now. Having said that, one of the reasons that people are coming to Texas is because corporate America is coming to Texas. I practice in Plano, Texas, which happens to have a corporate headquarters there for Hewlett-Packard, Frito-Lay. Toyota has just moved their international headquarters or national headquarters to Plano. State Farm is here. We have an incredible corporate headquarters in Plano, Texas, and they actually offer tax incentives to these corporations to come down here and set up. And so what that's done is brought in some very high-tech companies, very low, non-industrial type of growth, which is good. That's what we want here anyway. And it's bringing in very high quality people. These are CEOs, corporate leaders, mid-level leadership people, so forth into the area. They have great insurance. So that's one of the reasons is that corporate America is coming here.
And I see that in Charlotte, because all these big Fortune 500 companies with that high overhead in Manhattan are saying all we have to do is move our overhead out of Manhattan, which costs you $30,000 a year just to park a car on the street.
Yeah.
We could move to Charlotte. I mean, just the overhead. I see it in Silicon Valley. Those companies are moving way inland. I mean, they're looking at these towns of 25,000. They're like, my God, we can go to some town. They got an empty, boarded up building that's 10,000 square foot and take over that and cut our overhead nugget in half. I mean, it's so it is a low cost, and that's where I'm benefiting in Phoenix. I mean, it seems like every 10th new patient, they say, well, yeah, my owner said they just passed some more regulation in California, and my boss said, you know what, that's it. We're moving to Arizona. This is just, there's so much regulation in California, we can't even survive. So it's been our benefit. So when you said when dentists are calling you, blah, 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 how can they call you? I mean, will you give out, how does one of my homies listening to you right now ask a question? Because they all got questions. How can they contact you?
Well, if you can contact me through Phase 2. You can contact me through my coaching. Phase 2. Do you want a phone number? I'll give it to you.
Sure.
214-540-8085. That'll put you into Phase 2 Associates.
Give it again.
214-540-8085.
What if they're emailers?
You can contact me at jsmalldds@phase2associates.com, and that's all spelled out longhand. TWO for the 2, phase2associates.com.
Okay, that's J Small
DDS.
at J Small DDS at phase2associates.com.
Right.
And they could go leadfacetoface.com and get your contact there, or phase2associates.com. What do you think about the leadership skills when these kids come in and they're worried about, can they do molar endo or can they pull out a tooth? And get everything out versus leading the team? What do you, how does a person listening to you right now know if they're a leader, and how important is it that I just don't do clinical dentistry, but I can lead the front desk, the hygienist, the assistants,
Sure.
and how can they improve their game on that? How do you become a better leader? And
Okay.
let me ask it to you this: do you think being born a great leader is just hardwired, introvert, extrovert, whatever, or do you think you can be coached to be a better leader?
I absolutely think you can be coached. Let me give you an example. And I was supposed to talk about religion or whatever, like you just said. I have a particular client who never saw himself as being a leader because he always thought leadership as being John Wayne. You know, you kind of stroll into the place and you take control of everything. Maybe a Ronald Reagan type of leader, something like that. And he never saw himself in that capacity. And because of that, he would always shy away from taking leadership responsibility in his practice. Well, he happens to be a devout Christian. I happen to be Jewish, which is kind of funny that a Jew would be talking to him about Christ, but it just so happens.
Well, Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah, exactly. It just so happens that Jesus Christ was probably the ultimate servant leader. And so I talked to him about servant leadership. That you don't have to be John Wayne. You don't have to be Ronald Reagan. You can be a very effective, powerful leader through being a servant leader. And I introduced him to some books and so forth to read. And of course, that was something he was really tuned into. And now he is becoming a very effective leader in his practice. He's developing the culture that he never had. He's empowering the people that he never did. His practice is growing, which it hasn't in years, and he's just happy as can be. And he just didn't have in his mind, he didn't understand what leadership is. All of us can lead. Actually, being a leader is being authentic. It's being who you are. And we think we have to be somebody else because being who we are is not effective. But it's the most effective thing we can do is letting people see who we are and understand who we are and become comfortable that we're consistently who we are, no matter if it's in our personal lives or in our professional lives.
Well, when my mom hears this podcast, she's gonna love you. She goes to church every day, and her two oldest daughters are Catholic nuns, so she just fell in love with you. But this sounds like what you were saying earlier, that this has to do with you coach people on self-limiting beliefs. Talk about that. What do you think some of my homies listening to you right now or don't realize are self-limiting beliefs?
Well, I think that the example we just gave, one of the biggest self-limiting beliefs is that we're not leaders. All of us have the capability to lead, you know, and because of that, that self-limiting belief creates a blind spot because we can't see what the problem is. You know, you take these people, these doctors that are burned out, and you know what that's like. You've seen them, we've all seen them. They're totally burned out. They have no passion for what they do. They're totally devoid of energy for what they do. The reason is that they have never accepted the fact that they can be a leader in their practice and actually enjoy the practice by empowering the people that work for them to become the kind of people that they need to achieve their goals, because we don't do it ourselves. None of us achieve our goals by ourselves. If you're going to be successful in practice, you're going to have a team that's going to be successful. And I will tell you that's the one thing that differentiates, I think, a successful practice from a non-successful practice. The team is successful, not just the dentist.
But Joel, let's cut the chase, dude. They're listening to you right now, and they know what they want to say to their assistant, their hygienist, or their leader, but they'd rather just go in the bathroom and cough up a blood clot. How do you coach someone to have an uncomfortable conversation? Because I feel like they know what they got to talk about, the 4,000-pound elephant in the room, but they just don't want to confront.
But that's the whole point. If you're a good leader, there's no confrontation. If you have your core values and those are consistent and they're bought into by everybody in the practice, then everybody understands what's expected of them. So when we talk with people, and what used to be confrontational now really becomes a discussion of, is this consistent with our core values? Let's take, for example, in my office, and I'm not here to talk about my office, but let me just use this as an example if you don't mind. I only give my assistants and my staff two things to worry about. I don't burden them with a whole lot of jargon or whatever they have to remember. I say to them two things. One is your intended action in alignment with our core values? And number two, was it in the best interest of our patient? And if they can answer those two questions in our discussion, then no matter what the outcome, they're okay by me. Because the intent was there, I'm willing to accept the fact that they'll make mistakes. We all do. We're human beings. As long as the intent was there, then the only question I have to ask them at that point, Howard, is what do we learn from this?
Okay, when I ask a dentist, okay, so let's say that you do have an assistant or a staff or receptionist and everything, and they don't have the intent to action, the patient's not first. When I ask the dentist, what is the most stressful thing in your office? You know, is it pulling out a wisdom tooth? Is it attempting molar endo? They say firing an employee has got to be the worst thing, period. And I mean, it's just the worst. What advice would you give them when you think someone has to be fired? How is there any coaching you can give on firing an employee?
Yes, yes, there is. And I never fire employees. I give them a choice. And it's their choice whether they want to stay there or not. And let me explain. And I'll use a very specific example from my practice. I had an assistant for 10 years. She grew up kind of tough. Her parents died in early age. She's from Louisiana. She was estranged from her son and grandson, and she was up here in the Dallas area in our practice for 10 years. And she lived with her sister who raised her, and her sister died of lung cancer very suddenly, and it totally changed her. And she became very difficult to deal with, difficult to communicate with. And ultimately, I called her into my office and I said, look, here's the thing. You know what it takes to be in this practice because you know what our values are, you know what the core ideology is for this practice. You have a choice. You can either come back into alignment, and we want you to. We love you. We want you to be here, or you can choose to leave. And I got to tell you, how this is a funny story, and I do this when I speak. I tell this story. The next day, she left. It was the end of the day. The next day, she comes into my office and bursts into tears. And I said, "Oh boy, this is going to be a bad day." So she was crying for joy, and let me tell you why. Because of that discussion, she realized that she really was lonely, and she wanted to be back in Louisiana with her son and her grandson. And I never fired anybody like that. I got a hug, I got a kiss. We gave her a party, we gave her a gift. She left, she went back to Louisiana, and she's happy as she can be. And our practice is better off as well. So I can tell you that there are ways to avoid that confrontation. It does not have to be confrontational. It doesn't.
You know, I just read on Lessa, top city to live in the United States for family values, culture, everything was Lafayette, Louisiana.
Really?
That is some good deals. I want to open up a whole other can of worms if you don't mind saying with me. It's Sunday, but there's the Dallas Cowboys aren't playing today, and neither the Arizona Cardinals, and so we might have a little time. Talk about the future of practice transitions. Do you see that changing in your career from back in the day to going forward?
Oh gosh, absolutely. Howard, back in the 50s, dentists would just close their door and walk away. I mean, you know who was the dental transition people? You know who they were?
Alan F. Thornburg of AFCO?
Well, no. Even before that, they were dental sales reps. And the reason was the dental sales reps knew people that were looking for practices or coming out of school. And they also were in practices, and they saw someone getting ready to retire, and they would put them together. And that was how dental transitions actually started. Then people started to realize that there's actually value in a dental practice. You can actually sell it at the end of your career. But I tell you what we're seeing today, which is kind of sad, and I usually have a bell curve which shows the growth phase, the plateau phase, and then decline. So many of the practitioners today, for whatever reason, whether it be the decline in the economy, the dot-com failure, the recession, whatever, are waiting until they're so far down the backside of that bell curve that there's very little left to sell, if anything, because the fixed expenses do not change. Yet when your production decreases, the margin of profit becomes so small that there's nothing there to sell. And we're seeing a lot of that today, and which is really kind of sad because now is a great time to sell a practice. It is definitely a seller's market right now. And with interest rates being at historically low levels, these young doctors can get the loans. The money is there.
And to explain to these kids, what do you mean by historic low interest rates? I remember when I got out of school in '87, my first house I bought I thought I was the smartest guy in Phoenix because I was getting my house financed at 12%. The seller was into it at 14%, and one of my buddies just locked into a house at a high 12%. And I remember when I was a senior in high school, a couple of my best friends' father, the interest rates hit 21%, and they had open debt, which means the interest rate floated 200 basis points over prime. And when prime hit 21%, Dad actually went in the barn and blew his head off. And so now, what is interest rates now for a loan?
You can get a practice loan if, assuming you're credit worthy, have decent credit, 3.9%.
And is that interest rate locked in if interest rates start tacking up a quarter every?
It is.
Yeah, and a lot of you guys listening to this, the last recession was 2008. And this is 2016. Now, the average recession is every 8 years. I'm not saying I believe there's a recession coming or anything like that, because anybody who predicts the economy is completely batshit crazy. Ask Warren Buffett what he thinks of anyone who predicts where the stock market's going. He says they're just if you make a prediction, you're nuts. But I see a lot of dentists with these debts that float. You just can't have floating debt.
No.
It's got to be locked in because you never know what's around the corner.
Well, inflation is going to happen. It just has to. I mean, it's going to come back, and there's no question that the interest rates are going to start. They have to go up eventually.
And in our lifetimes, remember all the experts. Did they predict the Berlin Wall coming? Did they predict 9/11? Did they predict the 2008 mortgage crisis? I mean, in my experience, in my half century, all these talking heads or TVs are idiots, because in my half century, I never saw one expert predict anything profound that happened in my lifetime. They were always, straight out of, what the hell was that? And then everybody afterwards, well, we saw this coming because of blah, blah, blah. It's like, really? Well, nobody said anything leading up to it. And then afterwards, all the experts all tell you why they knew this was around the corner.
I understand that.
Well, hey, buddy, that's our hour. God, that was the fastest hour I've ever had. I'm your biggest fan. I just think the world of you. So go to this website, leadfacetoface.com. Go to Phase 2 Associates. By the way, if you want to explode your blog, Dentaltown has 215,000 members, and we started a blog section, and those blogs are high traffic. So if you've already got the content, you could cut and paste some of them. And what's neat about that is what everybody tells me when they post their blog on Dentaltown, it's free marketing, and then their own personal website blog takes off. Same thing with podcasts. Dentaltown has an app, and there's 215,000 on the website, but almost 50,000 have downloaded the app on their smartphone, and it continues to download another 1,000 to 14. I think last month 1,400 more downloaded. But on the podcast section, the dentists who put their podcasts up there, they say their iTunes numbers explode because the dentists find it first on Dentaltown, and they listen to it on their Dentaltown app. So if you're out there, by the way, if you haven't downloaded the Dentaltown app, download the Dentaltown app. We also put 350 online CE courses on Dentaltown. They've been viewed over 600,000 times because it's just so much cheaper to lay on your couch and watch a course than fly across the country. But Joel, thank you so much for spending an hour with me, buddy. Any last words?
No, just go to, it's joelsmall.com would be the one they want to go to. Lead Face to Face was the old one, but joelsmall.com. And Howard, my goal is for everybody to be as successful as you have been. You're to be commended.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm glad you changed your name from Lead Face to Face to Joel Small, because my mom said I have a face for radio, not TV. And so mine would be Lead Voice to Voice. But hey, Joel, thank you so much for all you've done. If you ever want to put a course on Dentaltown or repost some of your blogs, I think it'll make your website explode. It'd be the best marketing you did.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the insightful interview. I appreciate it.
And now I want you to say that even though you live in Texas, deep down in your heart, you're truly an Arizona Cardinals fan, and you're not one of those obnoxious Dallas Cowboy fans.
Well, I won't admit to that, but thank you for the interview.
Okay, buddy. We'll see you on the football field in a few months.
All right.
Bye-bye.